The first rule of the Mafia wasn't about killing. It was about silence. And silence, I learned, doesn't just live in your mouth. It lives in your hands when they shake over morning coffee. It lives in your daughter's eyes when she stops asking where her father goes at night. It lives in the space between what you know and what you're allowed to say, and that space can swallow a family whole. My name is Angela Russo, and I was married to the Mafia for 32 years before I was married to the man. I met Vincent when I was 19. He worked at his uncle's social club in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. This was 1971. The neighborhood still smelled like the old country, garlic and espresso, and the men still wore their respect like Sunday clothes. Vincent had dark eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. What I didn't know then was that listening was his job. In the world he came from, listening kept you alive. We married in 1972 at Our Lady of Guadalupe. 300 guests. I wore my mother's dress, altered at the waist. Vincent wore a suit that cost more than my father made in 3 months, and I didn't ask where the money came from. That was my first lesson in being a Mafia wife. You don't ask. You watch the gifts pile up at the reception, envelopes thick with cash from men whose names you recognize from the newspaper's crime section, and you smile and you say thank you and you fold that question down so small it almost disappears. Almost. The thing about organized crime that nobody tells you is how organized it really is. How it has schedules, rhythms. Vincent left every morning at 9. He came home for dinner at 6, unless he didn't. Wednesday nights were card games. Sundays were for family, unless they weren't. And slowly, you start to understand that your husband's life is a language you're not allowed to speak, and your marriage is the translation of his silence. We had our first child in 1973, Michael, named after Vincent's grandfather, a man who came through Ellis Island in 1911 and died in 1964 without ever learning to write his own name in English. Vincent held Michael for the first time in the hospital, and I watched something change in his face. Not softness, fear. He looked at our son the way you look at something breakable. He's never going into this life, Vincent said. I didn't ask what life he meant. Our apartment was on 86th Street, 3rd floor, with a view of the elevated train. The bedroom walls were thin, and at night I could hear the couple next door arguing in Italian, the same argument my parents had, the same argument every Italian couple in Brooklyn seemed to have about money and respect and who said what to whom at whose mother's house. Normal problems. I envied them. Vincent's problems were not normal. The phone would ring at 2 in the morning, and he'd answer it on the first ring like he'd been awake the whole time. Maybe he had been. He'd speak in half sentences. Code I wasn't supposed to understand. He'd hang up and get dressed in the dark, and I'd pretend to be asleep because that's what he needed me to do. Pretend. The Mafia runs on pretending. The wives pretend not to know. The children pretend their father is a businessman. The neighborhood pretends the social club is just a place where old men play cards. And everyone pretends that the pretending isn't killing us all slowly from the inside out. In 1975, Vincent's crew did something. I don't know what, I still don't know, but I know it was big because of how quiet he got afterward. In the Mafia, silence has texture. There's the silence of respect, the silence of fear, and the silence of guilt. I'd learned to read them all. This was guilt. He came home one night at 4 in the morning, and he stood in the bathroom for an hour with the water running. When he came to bed, his hands smelled like bleach and cigarettes. I turned toward him in the dark. Vincent, go to sleep, Angela. What happened? Nothing happened. Your hands are shaking. He pulled them away from me, tucked them under the blanket. I said nothing happened. You didn't see anything. You don't know anything. That's how this works. I'm your wife. That's exactly why you don't know anything. He was protecting me. That's what I told myself. In the American Mafia, in every organized crime family from New York to Chicago to Philadelphia, there's this idea that you keep the women separate. You keep them clean. The FBI can't make a wife testify against her husband. So the less she knows, the safer everyone is. But safety is relative. You might be safe from the government, but you're not safe from the knowledge that eats at you in the dark. You're not safe from becoming a woman who flinches when her husband touches her because she doesn't know what those hands have done. We had our second child in 1976. A daughter. We named her Maria, after my grandmother. Vincent looked at her the same way he'd looked at Michael, like she was a debt he didn't know how to pay. The wives in our neighborhood, we had our own code. We'd meet at the bakery on 20th Avenue, and we'd talk about recipes and children and who got new furniture, and underneath it all was this understanding. We knew about the late-night phone calls and the money that appeared in envelopes and the way our husbands would disappear for days and come back looking like they'd aged years. We knew about the FBI surveillance vans parked down the block and the subpoenas delivered at dinner time and the lawyers who cost more than houses. But we never said it out loud. One afternoon in 1977, I was at the bakery with Teresa Catalano. Her husband, Sal, was in Vincent's crew. Teresa was pregnant with her third, and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with carrying a child. "How do you do it?" she asked me. "Do what?" "Live with not knowing." I looked at her carefully. We were in public. The bakery was full of women from the neighborhood, and in that world, walls had ears and ears had telephones. "I know everything I need to know," I said. "My husband loves me. He provides for us. That's enough." Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "Is it? I paid for my bread and left. I didn't know what else to do." In the Mafia family structure, this was how it worked. You held each other up by never acknowledging what you were holding each other up from. That night at dinner, Michael was 6 years old, and he asked Vincent what he did for work. Vincent was cutting his chicken. He didn't look up. "I help your Uncle Tony with his business." "What business?" "Importing, exporting." "What does that mean?" "It means I make sure things get where they need to go." Maria, who was 2, dropped her sippy cup on the floor. I bent to pick it up, grateful for the interruption. When I sat back up, Michael was still watching his father. "Tommy's dad is a fireman," Michael said. "That's good. What do you do that's good?" Vincent put his fork down. He looked at our son with an expression I couldn't read. "I take care of this family. That's what's good." Michael didn't ask again, but I started noticing how he watched his father. How he'd stand at the window when Vincent left in the morning, tracking him down the street. How he'd listen when Vincent talked on the phone, his small face serious, trying to decode the half-sentences and the silences. Children are smarter than we give them credit for. They know when something is wrong long before they have the words to say it. In 1978, the FBI came to our door. 2 agents, both wearing cheap suits and expensive shoes. They showed me their badges and asked if Vincent was home. I told them he was at work. They asked where he worked. I said at his uncle's place. They asked what kind of business his uncle ran. I said I didn't know the details. They asked if I'd be willing to come to their office to answer some questions. I said I had nothing to tell them. One of the agents, the older one with gray at his temples, leaned against our doorframe. "Mrs. Russo," he said, "we're trying to help you." "I don't need help." "We think you do. We think you're scared." "I'm not scared of anything." "Then you're not paying attention." After they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. My hands were shaking. When Vincent came home that night, I told him about the visit. He didn't look surprised. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "Good girl. Don't call me that. I'm not a child. I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" He took off his jacket and hung it in the closet. I could see the weight he was carrying in his shoulders, in the way he moved like every gesture cost him something. "I meant thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for protecting this family." "Is that what I'm doing?" "Yes." "It doesn't feel like protection. It feels like drowning." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something break open in his face. Regret, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that this life, this thing he'd chosen or been born into or couldn't escape from, was drowning both of us. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For all of it." That was the only time Vincent ever apologized to me for being in the Mafia. In organized crime families, you don't apologize. You don't acknowledge. You just keep moving forward because stopping means looking back, and looking back means seeing all the damage you've done, and that's unbearable. The thing about being a mafia wife is that you become very good at reading rooms. You walk into the social club to bring your husband his dinner, and you can feel the tension before anyone says a word. You can tell when something's wrong by the way the men are sitting, by who's talking to whom, by who won't meet your eyes. In the American mafia, the real mafia, not the movie version, information is currency. And as a wife, you collect that currency in tiny denominations, a look here, a silence there. And you hoard it because one day it might save your life. In 1979, Sal Catalano disappeared. Teresa called me at midnight. She was hysterical. Sal had left for a meeting 3 days ago and hadn't come home. She'd called everyone she could think of. Nobody knew anything, or nobody was saying anything, which in that world was the same thing. What do I do? She asked me. Wait, that's it, just wait? Yes, Angela, what if? Don't say it, don't even think it, you wait, and you take care of your children. And you don't talk to anyone about this. Not your mother, not your sister, no one. I'm scared, I know. I hung up and stood in the kitchen in the dark. Vincent was at a card game. I thought about calling him, but what would I say? That I knew something was wrong? That my friend's husband had vanished and I needed him to tell me everything was okay? In the mafia, you don't make those phone calls. You don't put anything into words because words can be overheard, recorded, repeated in courtrooms. Sal's body was found 2 weeks later in the trunk of a car at JFK long-term parking. The news said he'd been shot once in the back of the head. Execution style, they called it. The mafia family he'd been part of put out a statement through their lawyers saying they had no knowledge of the incident and condemning all forms of violence. At the funeral, Teresa stood at the casket with her 3 children. She was 6 months pregnant. She wore dark sunglasses indoors, and when people approached to offer condolences, she just nodded. She didn't cry. You don't cry at mafia funerals. You stand there straight-backed and silent, and you let people read into that silence whatever they need to. Vincent and I paid our respects. As we were leaving, Teresa caught my arm. You knew, she whispered. I didn't know anything. You knew something was wrong. You told me to wait. You knew. I looked at her pregnant belly, at her children standing nearby in their small black suits and dresses. I didn't know, I said again. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back. She was right. Sorry didn't bring anyone back. Sorry didn't undo the bullet or explain the betrayal or comfort the children who would grow up without a father. Sorry was just another word the mafia had taught us to swallow. After Sal's funeral, Vincent was different. More careful. He'd check the car before we got in, running his hands under the wheel wells, looking in the back seat. He'd make me and the children leave the apartment first when we went somewhere, watching from the window until we were in the car. At night, he started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. I didn't find it by accident. He told me it was there. If anything happens, he said, you take the kids and you go to my cousin Frankie's in Jersey. You don't stop. You don't talk to anyone. You just go. What's going to happen? Nothing. But if it does, Vincent, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Fear keeps you alert. I wanted to ask him what Sal had done to deserve a bullet in the head. I wanted to ask if he'd been there, if he'd known it was going to happen, if he'd tried to stop it. But I didn't ask because I was afraid of the answer. Either he'd lie to me, which would confirm that our marriage was built on lies, or he'd tell me the truth, which would mean I'd have to live with knowing. So I said nothing. Michael was 8 years old when he started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, and when I'd run to his room, he'd be sitting up in bed, eyes wide, talking about men with guns. Vincent would stand in the doorway watching, and I could see him calculating something, weighing the cost of this life against what it was doing to our son. Maybe we should take him to a doctor, I said. No doctors. Vincent, he's terrified. He's fine. It's just bad dreams. They're not just dreams. What else are they, Angela? I looked at my husband standing there in the hallway light, and I realized he was asking me a real question. He wanted me to say it out loud. To name the thing we'd been pretending didn't exist. He's afraid, I said carefully, that something bad will happen to you. Nothing's going to happen to me. How do you know? Vincent didn't answer. Because he didn't know. In the Mafia, nobody knows. You can be careful, you can be smart, you can follow every rule, and still end up in the trunk of a car at JFK. That's the real truth about organized crime that they don't put in the movies. It's not about power or money or respect. It's about fear, constant, grinding, daily fear that one day you'll make a mistake or someone else will make a mistake and you'll pay for it with your life. We moved to Staten Island in 1981. Vincent said it was for the schools, for a bigger house, for a yard where the kids could play. But I knew it was because Brooklyn was getting too hot. Too many FBI agents. Too many investigations. Too many bodies. The new house was in a neighborhood where all the wives drove Cadillacs and wore gold jewelry and never talked about where the money came from. We had block parties in the summer and Christmas parties in the winter, and the men would stand around the barbecue talking in voices too low for anyone else to hear. And the women would stand in the kitchen talking about nothing at all. I met Rita DeLuca at one of those parties. Her husband, Paul, was a captain in the Gambino family. Rita was older than me, maybe 50, with hair dyed the color of red wine and rings on every finger. She took one look at me and knew exactly what I was. "How long you been married?" she asked. 9 years. Kids? 2. Boy and a girl. Good. 2's a good number. More than that and you start losing track. She sipped her wine. "Your husband, he's with the Colombo family?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Rita smiled. "Yeah, you do. It's okay. We all know. That's why we're all here in Staten Island. It's like a witness protection program, except we're protecting them from us knowing too much." "I don't know anything." "Sure you don't. None of us do. That's the deal." She leaned in closer. "But let me tell you something, Angela. When you stop knowing things, you start disappearing. First it's little things. You forget what you used to care about. Then it's bigger things. You forget who you were before you married him. And one day you wake up and you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror because you've spent so many years being nobody, knowing nothing, that you actually became nobody." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying don't lose yourself in his silence. That's what they want. They want us quiet and invisible. But you're still a person. You're still here. Don't forget that." Rita died 3 years later. Heart attack, they said. She was 53. At her funeral, I looked at all the wives standing there in their black dresses and gold jewelry, and I wondered how many of them were already ghosts. In 1983, Vincent got arrested. RICO charges, racketeering, conspiracy, extortion. They came at dawn with a warrant and enough agents to invade a small country. They handcuffed him in our bedroom while Maria, who was 7, watched from the hallway. Michael, who was 10, tried to fight one of the agents. They had to hold him back while his father was led out in handcuffs. "It's okay," Vincent said to them as they took him away. "It's all okay. Mom's here. Everything's okay." But nothing was okay. The trial lasted 4 months. I sat in the courtroom every day with the other wives, and we listened to the prosecution describe our husbands like they were monsters. Like they were animals. They talked about violence and intimidation and decades of organized crime. They showed photographs of crime scenes, recordings of phone conversations, testimony from informants who'd turned on their own families to save themselves. And through it all, I thought about Rita DeLuca's words. Don't lose yourself in his silence. The lawyer Vincent hired cost $200,000. I didn't ask where the money came from. At that point, I was so far past asking that I'd almost forgotten how. But I knew it wasn't from honest work. I knew it was blood money, laundered through some business or some scheme that probably hurt people I'd never meet. And I knew that accepting it, using it, living off it, made me complicit. That was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the uncertainty, not even the possibility of losing Vincent to prison. It was the realization that I'd been complicit all along. Every meal I'd cooked with money from that life. Every pair of shoes I'd bought for my children. Every moment of comfort and security. All of it built on a foundation I'd chosen not to examine because examining it meant admitting what I'd become. A mafia wife. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, they acquitted Vincent on most charges. He got 18 months on one count of conspiracy. His lawyer called it a victory. I called it a stay of execution. Vincent served 14 months in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I drove up every weekend with the kids to visit. We'd sit in a gray room with guards watching and try to have normal conversations through a phone while looking at each other through plexiglass. Maria would draw pictures to show him. Michael would tell him about school, about baseball, about anything except the truth, which was that he was furious. Furious at his father for being there. Furious at the mafia for taking him. Furious at me for pretending everything was fine. The night before Vincent came home, I sat Michael down at the kitchen table. "Your father is coming back tomorrow," I said. "I know. Things are going to be different now." "How?" I didn't know how to answer that. Were things going to be different? Or were we just going to go back to pretending? "He made some mistakes," I said carefully. "But he's still your father." "What mistakes?" "That's between him and God." "That's always the answer, isn't it? It's between him and God. It's not your business. You don't need to know." "I'm so sick of not knowing things, Mom. I'm sick of pretending." "I know. Do you? Because you seem pretty good at it." He left the table and went to his room, and I sat there in the empty kitchen and cried. Not because he was wrong. Because he was right. Vincent came home in 1985, and for a while, things were different. He didn't go to the social club. He didn't take calls late at night. He got a job at a construction company, legitimate work, and he'd come home dirty and tired and almost normal. We'd have dinner together as a family. We'd watch TV. We'd go to church on Sundays. And I started to think maybe it was possible. Maybe you could leave the mafia. Maybe you could just walk away. I was wrong. You don't leave the American mafia. The mafia leaves you, and it only does that when you're dead. The calls started again. The late night meetings. The envelopes of cash. Vincent said he was just helping out old friends, that he wasn't involved anymore, but I knew better. I knew because I'd learned to read him the way you read a language you've studied for years. I knew by the tension in his shoulders and the way he checked the rearview mirror and the way he kissed the kids goodnight like every night might be the last one. "You promised," I said to him one night after the children were asleep. "I'm not doing anything wrong. You're lying to me. I'm protecting you. You're killing us. You're killing this family. I'm providing for this family." With what? Blood money? Money from extortion and loan sharking and God knows what else. "Keep your voice down." Why? Are you afraid someone will hear? Afraid someone will know the truth? That's all we do in this family is worry about people knowing the truth. Vincent stood up from the couch. He looked older than he should have. Worn down. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "You knew what I was when you married me. I was 19. You knew. I didn't know this. I didn't know it would never end. That it would eat everything. That I'd spend my whole life lying to my children about who their father is." "Who am I, Angela? Tell me, who do you think I am?" I looked at my husband standing there in our living room, and I realized I didn't know how to answer. Was he the man who'd held our children when they were born? Or the man who'd stood by while people were murdered? Was he the man who brought me flowers on our anniversary? Or the man who'd helped bury bodies? In the mafia, people aren't one thing. They're everything at once, and that's what makes it so hard to leave. Because you're not just leaving the bad parts. You're leaving all of it. "I think you're scared," I finally said. "Of course I'm scared. Every day of my life, I'm scared. You think I want this? You think I chose this? Then leave." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because they'll kill me." It was the first time he'd ever said it out loud. The first time either of us had acknowledged the real truth. You don't leave the organized crime family. You're in it until you die, and if you try to leave early, they help you along. In 1987, Michael graduated from high school. He'd been accepted to Georgetown University, far enough from New York that he could start over. At his graduation party, I watched him walk around the yard talking to relatives and family friends, and I could see him measuring the distance he was about to put between himself and this life. Vincent saw it too. "He's not coming back," Vincent said. "Good. You think it's good that our son wants nothing to do with us?" "I think it's good that he's getting out." "There is no out, Angela. This family, this life, it follows you. It's in your blood." "That's not true." "Then why are you still here?" I didn't have an answer. Michael left for college in August. When we dropped him off, he hugged Maria, shook his father's hand, and barely looked at me. I understood. I represented all the silence, all the complicity, all the years of pretending. And he was done pretending. Maria was 11, old enough to understand that something was wrong with our family but young enough to still hope it could be fixed. She'd started asking questions, not about the Mafia, she never used that word, but about why we didn't have friends over, why we always paid for things in cash, why her father's business associates never came to the house. I did what I'd been trained to do. I told her not to worry, that everything was fine, that sometimes grown-up life was complicated but she didn't need to understand it. I was teaching her to be a Mafia wife. One night, I found her in her room crying. When I asked what was wrong, she said the girls at school were saying things about her father. That he was a criminal. That he hurt people. That everyone knew. "Is it true?" she asked me. I sat on her bed, and I looked at my daughter's face, and I saw myself at 19. Young and trusting and on the edge of something that would define the rest of her life. "It's complicated," I said. "That's not an answer." "I know. Mom, I need to know. Is Dad a bad person? Your father loves you very much." "That's still not an answer." She was right. It wasn't an answer. It was evasion. The same evasion I'd practiced for 15 years. And sitting there on her bed, I made a decision. I decided to tell her the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts that would put her in danger or make her a witness to things she couldn't unknow. But the truth about what it meant to be part of this family. "Your father," I said slowly, "is involved in things that aren't legal. He works with people who do bad things. And he's done bad things himself. I don't know all the details, and you don't need to know them. But yes, some of what those girls are saying is true." Maria stared at me. "Why are we still here?" "Because I love him, and because leaving is dangerous. And because this is the only life I've known for so long that I don't know how to have a different one." "That's stupid." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." After that night, something changed between Maria and me. She stopped asking questions, but not because I'd told her not to. She stopped because she'd gotten her answer, and the answer had made us allies. We were two women living in a house built on silence. And we'd acknowledged the silence to each other. That was more honesty than I'd given anyone in years. In 1989, the government started building a case against Vincent's crew. They'd flipped someone, one of the guys Vincent had known since they were kids. The guy was facing life in prison on drug charges, and he'd decided to trade everything he knew for a reduced sentence. In the Mafia, when someone flips, it's like dominoes. One person talks, and suddenly everyone's vulnerable. Vincent found out about it from his lawyer. When he came home that night, he looked like he'd aged a decade. "We need to talk," he said. We sent Maria to a friend's house. Then we sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us, and Vincent told me everything. Not the details of specific crimes. He still wouldn't give me that. But the broad strokes, the structure of the organization, the money, the violence, the fear. He told me about friends who'd been killed on orders from higher up. About the time he'd nearly been killed himself over a misunderstanding about money. About the constant pressure to earn, to produce, to prove his loyalty. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because they're going to arrest me again. And this time it's going to stick. I'm looking at 20 years. Maybe more. Then cooperate. Tell them what you know." "I can't do that." "Why not? Someone else already did. Why can't you?" "Because that's not who I am." "Who are you, Vincent?" He looked at me across the kitchen table, this man I'd been married to for 17 years. And I realized I'd asked him the same question he'd asked me. "Who are you?" And neither of us knew how to answer. "I'm someone who keeps his word," he said finally. even when it costs me everything. They arrested him 6 weeks later. Same routine. Early morning. FBI agents in bulletproof vests. Handcuffs. The neighbors watching from their windows. Maria crying in her room. And me, standing in the doorway, watching them take him away again. The new charges were more serious. Murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. Racketeering. Money laundering. The prosecutor held a press conference and called Vincent and his crew a cancer on society. The headlines called them animals. The newspapers ran photos from the surveillance. Grainy shots of Vincent and the other men outside the social club, looking exactly like what they were. I hired the best lawyer I could afford. He was expensive and confident and blunt. Your husband is going to prison, he told me. The only question is for how long. What are his options? Cooperate or get convicted. He won't cooperate. Then he'll get convicted. How long? Life, probably. They've got him on 3 murders. I felt the room tilt. 3? According to the cooperating witness. He drove the car on 1. Helped dispose of the body on another. Was present at the 3rd. Vincent never told me about any of this. The lawyer looked at me like I was a child. Of course he didn't. The trial started in early 1990. It lasted 7 months. Every day, I sat in that courtroom and listened to the government describe my husband's life. They played wiretaps where you could hear Vincent talking about taking care of problems and making people understand. They showed photos of crime scenes. They brought in witnesses who testified about seeing Vincent with known criminals, about money changing hands, about conversations that couldn't be interpreted any other way. And through it all, Vincent sat at the defense table looking straight ahead, never reacting, never showing emotion. In the Mafia, you don't show emotion. You don't give them anything they can use against you. Even when they're describing you as a murderer, you sit there stone-faced and silent. The cooperating witness testified for 3 days. He described in detail how organized crime families operated, how decisions were made, how orders were carried out. He talked about Vincent like they'd never been friends. Like those years of loyalty meant nothing. And maybe they didn't. Maybe in that world, loyalty only exists until it doesn't. When the prosecutor asked him why he decided to cooperate, the witness said, "Because I didn't want to die in prison for a life that was never mine." I understood that. I'd spent 20 years in a life that was never mine. Vincent's life. The Mafia's life. A life built on rules I hadn't agreed to and loyalty I hadn't promised. The jury found Vincent guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. In the Mafia, life means life. They took him away in chains, and I sat in the courtroom trying to remember how to breathe. Maria was sitting next to me, holding my hand. She was 14 years old. She'd just watched her father get sentenced to die in prison. "What do we do now?" she asked. I didn't know. We moved back to Brooklyn. The house in Staten Island was seized by the government to pay Vincent's fines. Most of our savings were gone. The lawyers had taken some. The government had frozen the rest. I got a job as a receptionist at a dentist's office. It paid $9 an hour. After 17 years as a Mafia wife, living off money I'd never questioned, I was working for $9 an hour. Michael came home for Christmas that year. He'd graduated from Georgetown and was working for a law firm in Washington. He'd built a life as far from the Mafia as you could get while still being in the same country. When he walked in the door, I barely recognized him. He wore a suit. He talked about depositions and contract law. He looked so normal that it almost hurt. "How's Dad?" he asked. "He's in prison." "How do you think he is?" I meant, have you talked to him? "Every week. He calls on Sunday afternoons. We talk for 15 minutes about nothing. That's all they give us." "Does he ask about me?" "Every time." "What do you tell him?" "That you're doing well. That you're happy. That you got out." Michael looked around our small apartment in Brooklyn, at the cheap furniture and the thin walls and the view of the fire escape. "And you?" he asked. "Did you get out?" "Not yet. Are you going to?" "I don't know how." The thing about being a Mafia wife for 20 years is that you forget how to be anything else. You forget what it's like to have your own opinions, your own plans, your own life. You've spent so long being an extension of someone else's world that you've stopped existing separately from it. But slowly, very slowly, I started to remember. I started taking classes at the community college. Just one at first, English literature, then another, psychology. I'd sit in those classrooms with people half my age, and I'd feel like I was waking up from a very long sleep. I'd forgotten what it was like to think about things that weren't survival. To care about ideas instead of just getting through another day. Maria graduated from high school in 1993. She'd been accepted to Boston University. When I asked her what she wanted to study, she said criminal justice. Why? I asked, though I already knew. Because I want to understand it. What happened to Dad? What happened to us? I want to understand how the system works. That's not going to bring him back. I know, but maybe I can help other families. Families like ours. I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd grown up in the shadow of organized crime, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not the kind of pride you feel when your child gets good grades or wins a trophy. The kind of pride you feel when you realize they've become someone better than you ever were. Vincent didn't take the news well. I told him on one of our Sunday phone calls. Criminal justice, he said. She knows what that means, right? She's studying to be on their side. There are no sides anymore, Vincent. There's just people trying to live their lives. That's easy for you to say. You're not in here, and whose fault is that? He was quiet for a long time. Fair enough, I'm not trying to hurt you. But Maria has to live her own life. We all do. Is that what you're doing? Living your own life? I'm trying to. What does that mean? I looked around the visiting room at all the other wives and children and mothers talking on phones through plexiglass, and I realized this was the last time I was going to be one of them. It means I'm not coming back here, I said. What? I'm not visiting anymore. I'm not taking your calls. I'm not putting money on your commissary account. I'm done. Vincent, you can't do that. I'm your husband. You were my husband. Now you're a man in prison who made choices that destroyed our family. And I'm a woman who enabled those choices for 20 years by staying silent. But I'm not staying silent anymore. Angela, please. I'm sorry. I really am. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living in your shadow. I need to find out who I am when I'm not a mafia wife. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back at Vincent's face through the glass. I just stood up and walked out of that visiting room, and I kept walking until I was outside in the fresh air, and then I sat on a bench in the parking lot and cried harder than I'd cried in my entire life. Not because I was sad, because I was free. It took me years to really understand what freedom meant. Years to stop jumping when the phone rang. Years to stop looking over my shoulder. Years to stop expecting FBI agents to show up at my door or mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night. The mafia doesn't just get in your head. It gets in your bones. It changes how you move through the world. I finished my degree in 1995. Associates in psychology. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I got a job at a women's shelter in Brooklyn, helping women who were trying to leave abusive situations. A lot of them were married to men in organized crime. They'd come in with bruises and terror in their eyes, and they'd say they couldn't leave because their husbands would kill them or because they had nowhere to go or because they didn't know how to survive on their own. And I'd tell them my story. Not all of it, not the parts that were still too raw, but enough. I'd tell them that I'd been married to a man in the mafia for 20 years. That I'd lived in fear every single day. That I'd stayed silent and complicit because I thought that was love. And then I'd tell them that I left. That I walked away. That I was still alive and still standing and that they could be too. Some of them believed me. Some of them went back to their husbands. That's the thing about the mafia that nobody understands unless they've lived it. It's not just about violence. It's about control. It's about making you believe that you can't exist outside of it. And breaking free from that belief is harder than breaking free from the actual danger. In 1998, Teresa Catalano died. Cancer. She'd been sick for 2 years, and I'd visited her a few times in the hospital. She looked so small in that bed, like all the years of carrying her husband's secrets had physically shrunk her. The last time I saw her, she was barely conscious. But she opened her eyes when I held her hand. And she said something I'll never forget. We were ghosts, Angela. All of us. We died the day we married them. We just didn't know it yet. I told her that wasn't true. That we were survivors. That we were still here. She smiled a little. You got out. That's different. You could have gotten out too. No, I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. You were strong. You raised 3 kids alone after Sal died. You survived. Surviving isn't the same as living. She closed her eyes. She died 2 days later. At her funeral, I looked around at all the women I'd known from the neighborhood. Rita DeLuca's daughter was there, looking just like her mother, married to someone in the Genovese family. Connie Martino was there with her sons, both of whom had followed their father into organized crime. Isabella Greco was there, still wearing her husband's ring even though he'd been dead for 10 years. We were all there, the wives and widows and daughters of the Mafia, and I realized that Teresa had been right. Most of us were ghosts. We'd disappeared into that life, and we'd never found our way back out. But I had. Michael got married in 2000. He married a woman named Jennifer, a lawyer he'd met at his firm. She was smart and ambitious and knew nothing about where Michael came from. At the wedding, I watched him dance with his new wife, and I could see how hard he was working to be someone else. Someone clean, someone normal, someone whose father wasn't serving life in prison for murder. Are you going to tell her? I asked him. About Dad? She knows he's in prison. Does she know why? I told her it was white-collar crime. Fraud. That kind of thing. Michael, what? You want me to tell her the truth? That my father helped kill people? That I grew up in a mafia family? That's a great way to start a marriage. It's better than starting it with a lie. You're one to talk about lies. Mom, he was right. I'd lived a lie for 20 years. Who was I to judge him for trying to escape it? Maria graduated from Boston University and got a job with the FBI. When she told me, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My daughter, working for the same people who'd arrested her father. The same people I'd lied to and hidden from for 2 decades. How do you feel about that? I asked Vincent on one of the rare occasions I took his calls. How do you think I feel? I think you should be proud of her. Proud? She's working for the enemy. She's working to make sure other families don't have to go through what we went through. That's not being the enemy. That's being better than we were. Vincent was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, older. You did good with them, Angela. With both of them. They got out. We all got out, Vincent. Some of us just did it while we were still breathing. In 2003, I got a call from the prison. Vincent had collapsed during lunch. By the time they got him to the hospital, he was already gone. Heart attack. He was 54 years old. I didn't cry at first. I sat on my couch in my small apartment, and I felt nothing. Just empty. All those years of fear and silence and complicity, and this was how it ended. A phone call from a corrections officer telling me that my husband, the man I'd loved and hated and feared and left, was dead. The funeral was small. Michael came with Jennifer. Maria came alone. A few of Vincent's cousins showed up. A couple of old guys from the neighborhood who were still alive and out of prison. That was it. No mafia family in attendance. No representatives paying respects. In organized crime, when you die in prison, you die forgotten. The family moves on. They have to. Remembering is dangerous. We buried Vincent next to his parents in a cemetery in Queens. The priest said some words about redemption and forgiveness. Michael and Maria stood on either side of me, holding my hands. And I thought about all the funerals I'd been to over the years. All the wives standing at gravesides, wearing their dark dresses and their gold jewelry, burying their husbands too young. At least Vincent had made it to 54. Some of them didn't make it to 40. After the funeral, Michael and Maria and I went to a diner in Brooklyn. The same diner where Vincent had taken me on our first date back in 1971. It looked exactly the same. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, the smell of coffee and bacon. Do you think he had any regrets? Maria asked. Everyone has regrets, I said. I mean about the life. About the Mafia. About what he did. I think he regretted getting caught. I don't know if he regretted anything else. That's sad, Michael said. It is, but it was his choice. He chose that life, and he lived with the consequences. Did you choose it? Maria asked me. I thought about that 19-year-old girl in her mother's wedding dress, smiling at a man with dark eyes who listened like it was his job. Did she choose this? Did she know what she was choosing? I chose him, I said. I didn't know I was choosing everything else that came with him. But that's not an excuse. I stayed. For 20 years, I stayed and I kept quiet and I let it all happen. So yes, I chose it. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. We finished our coffee in silence. Then Michael and Jennifer flew back to Washington, and Maria went back to Boston, and I went back to my apartment in Brooklyn. Alone, but not lonely. That's the thing I'd learned in the years since I left Vincent. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. For 20 years, I'd been surrounded by people, family, neighbors, the wives from the neighborhood, and I'd been desperately, crushingly lonely because I couldn't be honest with any of them. Now I was alone, but I could be honest. With myself, with the women at the shelter, with anyone who asked. And honesty, I'd learned, was worth more than company. I kept working at the women's shelter. Over the years, I helped dozens of women leave situations similar to mine. Some of them made it. Some of them didn't. The ones who didn't would go back to their husbands, and sometimes I'd see their names in the newspaper later. In the obituaries, survived by their children and their husbands, who had killed them in every way that mattered long before they'd actually died. In 2008, the economy collapsed. A lot of legitimate businesses went under. But organized crime? It kept going. It always keeps going. Because the Mafia doesn't depend on the stock market or consumer confidence. It depends on fear and desperation, and there's always plenty of both. I saw it in the new women who came to the shelter. Younger wives of younger criminals, wearing cheaper jewelry but carrying the same fear in their eyes. The American Mafia had changed its methods, modernized its operations, but the fundamental structure was the same. Men at the top making money through violence and intimidation. Families at the bottom paying the price. Will it ever end? One young woman asked me. She was 23, married to a low-level associate in the Lucchese family. She had a black eye and a toddler sleeping in her arms. The Mafia? I asked. No, probably not. Then what's the point of leaving? The point is that you're not in it anymore. Your son isn't growing up in it anymore. That's how it ends. Not all at once. One family at a time. She left her husband that week. Last I heard, she'd moved to Pennsylvania and was working as a nurse. Her son is 10 now. He doesn't know anything about his father's life. That's how you break the cycle. With silence of a different kind. Not the silence of complicity, but the silence of protection. You don't talk about it because you're not going to let it define the next generation. Michael and Jennifer had 2 daughters. When they bring them to visit me, I look at these little girls with their clean clothes and their easy laughter, and I think about how far we've come. 2 generations removed from the Mafia. They'll never know what their grandfather did. They'll never sit at a dinner table where half the conversation is in code. They'll never wake up to FBI agents at the door. They'll be normal. That's what we bought with all those years of fear and silence. Normal. For the next generation. Maria never married. She says it's because of her work, because she travels too much, because she's focused on her career. But I think it's because she saw what marriage looked like in our family, and she decided she'd rather be alone. I understand that. Sometimes the damage runs so deep that the only way to survive is to avoid the situations that caused it. She still works for the FBI. She's a supervisory special agent now, focused on organized crime. Sometimes she tells me stories about cases she's working on, and I hear echoes of my old life. The same patterns, the same structure, the same fear that keeps everyone in line. Does it bother you? I asked her once. Investigating people like your father? He made his choices, she said. I'm making mine. But does it bother you? She thought about it. Sometimes. When I'm interviewing a wife and I can see her doing exactly what you did, lying, covering, pretending she doesn't know. And I want to shake her and tell her to run. But I can't do that. I have to stay professional. I have to follow the rules. The rules didn't protect me, or Teresa, or Rita, or any of us, I know, but they're all we have. In 2015, I went back to Staten Island. I hadn't been there in 25 years. Not since we'd lost the house. I drove past our old street, and I saw that the house was still there. Different people living in it now. A swing set in the backyard where Vincent used to grill on summer evenings. Someone else's life built on top of ours. I parked the car and sat there for a while, remembering. Not the good parts. There weren't many good parts. But the real parts. The moments of genuine connection between the fear. The times when Vincent would hold me at night and I could feel him shaking because he was as scared as I was but trying not to show it. The times when the kids were small and we'd pretend, just for an afternoon, that we were a normal family. Those moments were real, even if everything around them was built on lies. A woman came out of the house with a dog. She saw me sitting there and waved. I waved back. She probably thought I was lost or waiting for someone. She had no idea that 30 years ago, I'd lived in that house. That I'd raised my children there. That I'd learned what it meant to be a mafia wife in that kitchen, in that bedroom, in those rooms that now belonged to someone else. I drove away without looking back. I'm 63 years old now. I've been free from the mafia for longer than I was in it, but there are still nights when I wake up with my heart pounding, convinced I heard a phone ringing or a knock at the door. The fear doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it. Last month, I got a letter from a woman I'd never met. She said she'd found my name through the shelter, that someone had told her I might be able to help. Her husband was in the Bonanno family, mid-level, making good money, but she wanted out. She wanted to know if it was possible, if it was worth it, if she'd survive. I wrote her back. I told her everything I wish someone had told me at 19. I told her that yes, it's possible. And yes, it's worth it. And yes, she'll survive, but survival is harder than it sounds. I told her about the fear and the guilt and the slow, painful process of becoming a person again after years of being a ghost. I told her about my children and how they got out and built lives on their own terms. I told her about Teresa and Rita and all the women who didn't make it out, who died still carrying their husbands' secrets. And then I told her the most important thing. The thing I wished I'd understood 30 years ago. You are not your husband's life. You are your own person. And the silence they demand from you isn't protection. It's erasure. Every day you stay quiet, you disappear a little more. Until one day you look in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself because you've spent so long being nobody that you actually became nobody. Don't let that happen. Don't let them erase you. You deserve to exist. You deserve to have a voice. You deserve to live in the light instead of the shadows. Leave. Today, if you can. Tomorrow, if you can't. But leave, because the mafia doesn't get better. The American mafia, organized crime, it doesn't evolve or become kinder or suddenly start caring about the families it destroys. It just keeps going, generation after generation, eating up lives and spitting out ghosts. You can be more than a ghost. I was. I sent the letter 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard back. Maybe she left. Maybe she's still there, reading my words over and over, trying to find the courage. Maybe she threw the letter away and decided to stay. I'll never know. That's the hardest part of getting out. You can save yourself, but you can't save everyone. You can tell your story, but you can't make people listen. All you can do is survive, and hope that your survival shows someone else that it's possible. Yesterday, Maria called to tell me she'd been promoted again. Assistant director now, in charge of the entire organized crime division for the Northeast region. My daughter, who grew up in a house full of secrets, is now the person who brings those secrets into the light. I wish Dad could see this, she said. He'd be proud, in his own way. Would he, though? I'm literally the thing he spent his whole life avoiding. You're also his daughter, and despite everything, despite all his mistakes, he loved you. He wanted better for you than what he had. Then why didn't he leave? Because he couldn't, or because he thought he couldn't, or because by the time he realized he should, it was too late. I don't know, Maria. I spent 20 years trying to understand your father, and I never fully did. Do you hate him? I thought about that question. Did I hate Vincent? For the lies? For the danger? For the fear? For the wasted years? No, I said. I don't hate him. I'm angry at him. I'm disappointed in him. I wish he'd made different choices. But I don't hate him. Hate takes too much energy, and I spent too many years giving all my energy to his life. I'm not giving him any more. Maria was quiet for a moment. That's probably the healthiest thing I've ever heard you say. She was right. It had taken me 40 years, but I'd finally learned how to let go without holding on to resentment. That's the final step in leaving the Mafia. Not just physically walking away, but emotionally releasing yourself from the anger and the what-ifs and the might-have-beens. You were there. You survived. Now you're here. That's enough. Michael called last week. He and Jennifer are getting divorced. 20 years of marriage ending because, as he put it, she finally found out the truth about his father. About his childhood. About the Mafia family he came from. Someone at his firm had done a background check for a case and discovered it all. She says she can't trust me anymore, he told me. Because I lied about Dad. About where I came from. Did you lie, or did you just not tell her? What's the difference? I don't know, but it's the same question I asked myself for 20 years. And what's the answer? I think the answer is that sometimes we keep quiet because we're trying to protect people. And sometimes we keep quiet because we're trying to protect ourselves. And it's hard to know which one you're doing until it's too late. That's not very helpful, Mom. I know, but it's honest. And honest is all I have left. He hung up angry, but he'll call back. He always does. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the silence and the Mafia family that shaped us all, we're still connected. Still trying to understand how to be people who came from that world but don't live in it anymore. That's the real story of the Mafia. Not the violence or the crime or the men in expensive suits making deals. It's the people left behind. The wives who learn to sleep with one ear open. The children who grow up fluent in code. The families that spend generations trying to scrub away the stain of what their fathers and grandfathers did. We're all still here, still surviving, still trying to figure out how to live in the light after so many years in the shadows. And maybe that's enough. Maybe surviving is enough. Maybe the fact that Michael and Maria and I are here, telling the truth, refusing to pass the silence down to the next generation, maybe that's the victory. Not a clean victory, not a Hollywood ending, just the small, hard-won triumph of refusing to disappear. I'm writing this down because Maria asked me to. She said it might help her work. Understanding the family perspective. Understanding what it's like for the women and children who didn't choose this life but got caught in it anyway. I told her I'd think about it. And then I started writing, and I couldn't stop. Because this is my story. Our story. The story of every woman who married into the Mafia and spent years disappearing. Every child who grew up learning to lie before they learned to read. Every family destroyed by loyalty that served everyone except the people who needed it most. This is what the Mafia really looks like. Not from the outside, where it's all violence and headlines and courtroom drama. But from the inside, where it's quiet desperation and constant fear and the slow erosion of everything you thought you were. I was Angela Russo. I became a Mafia wife. And then, finally, after 32 years, I became Angela again. That's the story. There's no moral, no lesson, no neat conclusion, just the truth. Raw and messy and painful and real. The Mafia took 20 years of my life. It took my husband. It nearly took my children. It took Teresa and Rita and countless other women whose names I never knew but whose faces I recognize in every new woman who walks into the shelter. But it didn't take everything. I'm still here. I'm still speaking. I'm still refusing to be silent. And that, in the end, is how you beat the Mafia. Not by destroying it. You can't destroy it. It's too big, too embedded, too much a part of the fabric of American organized crime to ever fully disappear. But you can refuse to let it erase you. You can refuse to let it take your voice. You can walk away, even when they tell you it's impossible. Even when you're terrified, even when you don't know who you are without it. You can leave. I did, and if I can do it, anyone can. That's what I want people to understand. The Mafia thrives on the belief that you can't escape. That once you're in forever. That speaking up will get you killed. That leaving is impossible, but it's not impossible, it's just hard. Harder than anything else you'll ever do. But possible. I'm proof. Maria is proof. Michael is proof. Every woman who walks out of the shelter and into a new life is proof. We survived. We're surviving, and we're telling our stories so that the next generation doesn't have to live in silence. That's how it ends. Not with arrests or convictions or courtroom justice, but with voices, with women refusing to be ghosts, with children growing up in the light instead of the shadows, with families breaking the cycle one painful, courageous decision at a time. The Mafia will always exist. There will always be men who choose violence and fear and power over everything else. There will always be organized crime families operating in the shadows of American cities. But there don't have to be silent wives. There don't have to be children who grow up learning that truth is dangerous. There don't have to be women who disappear into someone else's life and never find their way back. We can speak, we can leave, we can survive. I did, you can too. That's the end of my story. The real story, not the one the newspapers told or the prosecutors argued or the defense lawyers tried to spin. Just the truth. What it was like to be married to the Mafia. What it cost. What I lost. What I found when I finally walked away. Remember my name, Angela Russo. I was a Mafia wife. I was a ghost. And then I became a woman again. A whole person with a voice and a story and a right to exist outside of someone else's silence. Remember all our names. All the wives and daughters and mothers who lived in the shadow of organized crime and fought to find the light. We were here, we survived, and we're still speaking. The Mafia wanted us silent. We're done being silent. That's the story, that's the truth, that's all I have to say.